pistols. We got is that?
Tramps, where y'all at, blood?
I didn't invent it, blood. I just got with it.
Welcome to Boyz N The Hood TV. Today we tapping into the streets of LA. We're gonna be talking about the Pueblo Bishop Bloods and 38th Street. For years, the Pueblos and 38th Street were cordial with each other. Both hoods only blocks away, bordering South Alameda Street. 38th Street is one of the largest and oldest gangs in the city, dating back to the early 1920s, known to have a very violent reputation and connected to the Mexican Mafia. They got multiple cliques, like the South Central Locos, the Gato Locos, the Tiny Winos, and many others. Now, the Pueblo Bishop Bloods formed around the 70s in the Pueblo del Rio housing projects.
So one day, a very close friend of mine, his name was Skip, he was walking down Bandera, and some crips came up. East Side, they called themselves at that time, and they shot him in the neck. He asked him where was the party, he told them down the street, and they shot him. And so the decision was made then that no one else in that neighborhood was going to die.
They got two main cliques, the 5 Deuces and the 9 Deuces. Now, after years of not having any real issues with each other, things would change when a 38th Street member by the name of Goofy was shot and killed by a rival gang. On August 5th, 2001, known 5 Deuce Bishop Blood shooter by the name of Gene Sanders and another Blood member headed into 38th Street. They pulled up near a building on East 48th Place, and standing outside the building were members of 38. Sanders and the other Blood member would hop out the car. They would split up and go to different directions. As they approached, they both would open fire on the 38th Street members, and in return, 38th Street would return fire, hitting Sanders in his ankle as he collapsed to the ground. Now, in the midst of this shooting, Maria Villalvazo was trying to get her father inside the house, who was sitting on the porch. And while trying to do so, she was hit by gunfire, which would ultimately lead to her death. Now, Sanders and the other Pueblo Bishop member would run back to their car and flee the scene. 40 minutes later, Sanders would arrive at Martin Luther King Hospital to be treated for his gunshot wound. As the police began to investigate, they would match DNA from a blood trail at the scene to Gene Sanders. Also, a fellow Bishop Blood member by the name of Turner would cooperate with police, telling them that Sanders had planned on doing the 38th Street attack that night. Gene Sanders would be arrested for multiple charges, including the murder of Maria, but also he would be tied to the murder of a drug dealer by the name of Lee Holman. And by the end of his trial, Sanders will be found guilty and convicted of 10 counts, including murder, attempted murder, and robbery, and sentenced to 186 years to life in prison. Now, just 3 years later, this war would continue on and continue to be violent. August 2nd, 2009, Raul Rodarte of 38th Street was armed with a 9mm and drove into Pueblo Bishop neighborhood at around 8:30 a.m. A nearby group of Bloods stood in front of the Del Rio projects talking. Raul, without hesitation, stopped in the middle of the street, hopped out of the car, and started dumping. The Bishop Bloods immediately started running, and Vincent Casson was hit in his leg, and Jesse McWayne was critically wounded with a gunshot wound to his back. The EMTs would arrive, and both Vincent Casson and McWayne will be transported to the hospital. Casson will survive his injuries, but McWayne will be pronounced dead. Once police arrived on scene and began to investigate, 38th Street gang name had been traveling out through the projects, and only 40 minutes later, the Pueblos will retaliate. Rondell Young, a.k.a. P. Grump, and Anthony Gabriel, a.k.a. Bandit, and other bishops will ride into 38th Street Hood, driving in a black Chrysler 300. They spotted a 23-year-old Francisco Carnillo at a nearby car wash, vacuuming the inside of his vehicle. Also inside that car was Francisco's 2-year-old son. Young, who was the driver of the car, would pull up, and Anthony would hop out the car with a shotgun and shoot Francisco in his back multiple times, fatally wounding him as he fell to the pavement. As the EMTs arrived, they would rush Francisco to the hospital where he would be pronounced dead. Now, it would later come out that Francisco had no gang ties whatsoever, just an innocent bystander caught up in this war. But surveillance footage would capture the black Chrysler on camera, and the cops were able to ID the owner of the vehicle. It was traced back to Helen Young, Rondell's mother. Also, a bishop by the name of Tresvant would tell detectives that Anthony came back to the projects bragging about popping a 38th Street member not long after the shooting. This and further evidence will ultimately lead to both of their arrests. Now, during questioning, Rondell would admit to being the driver of the car. Also, while being questioned, Anthony would also admit to detectives that he was in a vehicle at the time of the shooting, but he would also state that Shane Tresvant was also in the car with him. Both men will be charged, and during the trial, Rondell and Anthony would be acquitted by the state jury for the shooting. But the feds would then pick up the case, and the Pueblo Bishop Bloods will be hit with a RICO charge, and they will tie both Rondell and Anthony and 40 other members to Francisco's murder and multiple other murders, along with drug charges. Anthony Gabriel will be sentenced to 40 years in prison, and Rondell Young was sentenced to life in prison. And also, 38th Street member Raul Ordarte was convicted for the murder of the Bishop Blood, Jesse McWayne, and was sentenced to life in prison. Now, just 1 year later, on March 30th of 2010, at around 10 a.m., Pueblo Bishop Blood member by the name of William Reed saw a 38th Street member by the name of Jorge Garcia standing outside across the street from Honduras Park. Reed would then run up on Garcia, and they would exchange words, and without any hesitation, Reed would pull out a 38 and shoot Garcia multiple times as he fell to the ground, clutching his stomach. Reed would then head across the tracks and run straight to the Del Rio projects. Nearby witnesses would call 911, and Garcia will be taken to the hospital where he would die from his wounds. Only a few hours later, officers would ride through the Del Rio projects looking for Reed. They would eventually spot him, and Reed would take off running and head to a rooftop where he tried to ditch the gun. But without anywhere else to run, Reed would surrender. After being arrested, during questioning, Reed would claim that Garcia called him racial slurs and threatened to kill him, and even stated that Garcia attempted to pull a gun from his waistline. So in fear for his life, he shot Garcia, but there was no evidence that Garcia had a gun on him. During his trial, the prosecutors would debunk the self-defense theory and state that Reed went into 38th Street Hood with the intent to kill. And by the end of the trial, William Reed will be found guilty and convicted and sentenced to 40 years to life in prison. Now, 3 years later, after this shooting, the Pueblo Bishop Bloods were having a party in the projects. That night, 38th Street member Juan Lora, aka Shocks, and another member known as Jokes would make their way to the Bishop's Hood nearby the projects. As they approached, Laura would yell out, 38, and open fire on a group of people standing outside. Gerardo Lopez will be critically wounded, and another man will be injured. Laura and Jokes would immediately leave the area as Lopez and another man laid on the ground. Once the EMTs arrived, Lopez and the other individual who was shot will be taken to the hospital at around 10 p.m. And not long after arrival, Lopez was pronounced dead. Witnesses at the scene would identify Laura as the shooter, and he would be arrested. Now, during questioning, initially, Laura would deny being a part of the shooting, but later, he would admit to being the actual shooter. He would then be charged with the murder. While in custody, his mother would come to visit him and ask him what had he done. And Laura simply replied, "Murder, mommy." She then would ask him, "Why?" And his response was, "Because I'm from 38. By the end of his trial, Laura will be convicted of murder and attempted murder and sentenced to life in prison. I want to thank everybody for tapping in, and I hope y'all enjoyed this, and I'll see y'all next time.